An option, always an option. Want to keep stuff in the Discord for certain people, right?
Welcome back, Mighty Vandals, the Tubs of the Club, brought to you tonight by Snake River Stampede Whiskey. We'll tell a little bit more about that later in the show. We are the Idaho Vandals affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I am your host, Dallas Hammer, as we are breaking down the Los Angeles Rams on fire victory, even hotter than the city of Los Angeles. I'm kidding, guys. We are talking Vandal football like we're always talking. The man in Moscow, producer, Marten Heemstra. Martin, how's it going?
It's going well. It's a little cold in here, but it's always good to be back on the show talking Vandal athletics, football, basketball stuff, another big weekend ahead for basketball that I'm sure Brian and I will be getting into soon.
As Martin is teasing you all with just the tips, we are going to be talking some basketball. The basketball expert himself, brave, bold Brian Marceau. How's it going, dude?
Dude, it's going well. It's kind of a weird... just with the fact of having the new coach still means like football is going wild all the time. Like if you remember the hashtag Only Tubs Discord, patreon.com/Tubs at the club, it costs less than a cup of coffee a month, guys. The discussion about like, hey, who's coming into the program, new coaches, who might come into the new program, it's been pretty busy for pretty much since the moment Thomas Ford was announced. So it weirdly makes football feel like, again, like the spring game is like a week away or something like that when it's months away. But that's a long way of saying, man, things are going well. A big shipment of whiskey hit the Marceau house today. So, yeah, I mean, things are firing on all cylinders.
Speaking of firing on all cylinders, we're going to get right onto the right track, gentlemen. Brian and Martin are going to talk to us about some men's and women's basketball. Gentlemen, producing in public, we didn't figure out who was going to go first. So I'm just going to take my hands off the wheel and watch as this car crashes.
So men's basketball is, it's a story to watch, guys. So, hey, last week, Idaho goes 1-1 against Sac State and top 5 Portland State, if I ever get the schedule up. Okay, so Idaho picks up a win on the road at Sacramento State, 80-67. Jack Payne leads the way with 23 points, and then picks up a loss at top 5 Portland State, 75-63. For both of these games, Idaho was shorthanded in the post. Julius Mims did not dress, and that's been a pretty big deal for Idaho. So Tom Kendall asking any update on Mims. No update. But anyway, Idaho is shorthanded in the post for both these games. But I mean, that actually let Idaho kind of do what it needs to do. This team, look, what Idaho lacks, men's team, they lack post scoring. And hey, if Mims is in there, he's not a guy that you want to drop it into for 15 shots in the post. This team just doesn't have post scoring. They don't have great shot creation off the dribble. So what's that mean? This team needs to hit threes. And look, Idaho's been hitting threes at about a little over 36, right around 36, 37% on the season, which is good for top 60 out of 355 D1 teams. So Idaho's a pretty good 3-shooting team, but this team just has to rely on threes to pick up wins. And that's essentially the story of what happened. I mean, against Sacramento State, Idaho hits 38% from 3, 13-34, and that's good enough to get this team to 80 points. I mean, Idaho puts points on the board. They're not, because of their size, it's tough for this Idaho team to be like elite defensively. They play hard, but they're also going to surrender some points. That's just how this team works. Against Portland State, the issue was Idaho shot 7 of 34 from 3. Honestly, it's a miracle that the Portland State game was as close as it was. Idaho shot 38% from the field, 20% from 3. We're out rebounded by 20. We're outscored 52-28 points in the paint, but Idaho actually led early in the second half. So the thing that to follow from these last few games, Idaho's getting some guys to develop and really step up. And the big name to pay attention to first is Jack Payne, sophomore transfer from Boise, Idaho, came to Idaho via Colorado State. Payne has really found a new gear the last 3 games. If you look at his point totals against Montana, Sac State, and Portland State, we get 18, 23, and 15. And you can see his shot attempts those last 3 games. He's at 12, 13, 11. He's getting more looks, but he's getting more looks because Payne's become aggressive and he's just looking more comfortable. So that's a big development for Idaho, because with no stars on this team, the Vandals just need a few guys to take like a half step developmentally, or every game they need a few guys to just step up. And a guy who's been steady throughout the year has been Christian Gonzalez, and he had a rough night against Portland State, only 7 points on 2 of 6 shooting. The previous 4 games, he'd been averaging right around 16 points, including scoring 15 against Sacramento. But Christian Gonzalez is a 2-guard. He's taken a step this year. And then Tyler Linhart off the bench. He started the season slow, and he had one of his most recent rougher nights against Portland State, just 9 points on 3 of 6 shooting. But he was in double figures the previous 4 games. So guys are starting to kind of step up and find their roles for Idaho. That's a big deal. A wild card is just going to continue to be Colton Mitchell, redshirt freshman starting point guard. Had a solid night against Portland State, scoring 14, but that was after 3 consecutive subpar, at least, scoring outings after his 32-point eruption on December 21st against Pacific. So heading into this week, your Vandals sit at 2-2 in Big Sky play. Realistically, they should be 3-1. The team gave away that Montana game, but 2-2. If we're talking Idaho 2-2 in Big Sky play with should be 3-1, you can tell that trend line is moving up in the right direction, aka you guys know what that means, right track. So the Vandals are going to play. They have Eastern Washington. Eastern is also 2-2 in Big Sky play. No game on Thursday. It's a doubleheader women's game. Marten will talk about that too this Saturday. Eastern Washington has been their own version of up and down as well. Eastern had a very, very rough out-of-conference schedule. A lot of good amount of P5 games as well as some tougher G5 in Big Sky play, sitting at 2-2, just like Idaho. Travel partners. Eastern split Montana and Montana State exactly the same way Idaho did, beating Montana State, losing to Montana. and split the Portland State Sac State games the exact same way. Lost to Portland State 64-59, picked up a win over Sacramento State 65-54. So what are we looking for in this game? One, is Jack Payne going to continue to be scoring? Is he going to be aggressive and score the way he has the last few games? That's a big deal. And can Idaho hit? They just need to hit that. If they can hit around 36-37% from three, that's kind of the recipe for Idaho being able to control games. And Eastern, they don't have the size, I think, to make Idaho struggle the way Portland State uniquely was a tough matchup. But look, Idaho, again, they got to get a couple guys to step up. The basic names of guys who kind of taken turns stepping up throughout the season are Jack Payne, Christian Gonzalez, Colton Mitchell, Tyler Russ, and Tyler Linhart. Those have been kind of the big four guys who've been rotating back and forth, putting up some points. But I'm going to throw it back to you guys. That's what I'm looking for throughout this basketball season is which guys are taking those developmental steps. That's the route to Idaho finishing at 500 or slightly above 500, which, full disclosure, I believe that is completely on the table for this team. Winning the conference title, no, but finishing on the right side or right around the right side at 500 in Big Sky play for the first time in 6 years, it's in play.
What, Brian, you say it's in play for somebody that's a much more casual watcher of basketball in general. It's just not my sport. It never really has been. Obviously, I've jumped in and enjoyed the Kloss era and the veggies for what they were, but basketball is just not my thing. I have football and hockey going on right now. It's one of the things that the Vandals have to make a really compelling argument for me to latch onto this team before the end of football season. What is it about this team that is getting them to the point of like, hey, this might be the first decent Idaho team in honestly getting close to a decade at this point? Obviously, it's been 6-7 years, but we're getting closer to a decade than we are to a half decade at this point.
Now, the first is this team. I've said a few times, this team doesn't have an first team all Big Sky offensive player on the team for sure. And what that means is, hey, if you don't have that guy, you need to have a handful of guys who are on a given night can step up. And that's what this team has been doing. I mean, if you look at how Idaho scores, there right now on the roster, there are 6 guys averaging between 11.8 points per game and 8.2 points per game on the season. So that's a lot. So that's a lot of steady production. So what's maybe different this year is without a star, there's more guys who are pretty solid throughout the season than at this point last year. And the big thing to look at is we need at least a couple guys who can be a little bit above solid. And Jack Payne has been that in the last few games. If Jack Payne can keep scoring around that 15-ish a game, that's huge for Idaho. But then, hey, a guy that I've talked about time and time again is this last year and this year is it took Tyler Linhart a few games. He was injured early too, but it took a few games to really figure out what his role was going to be. And he's kind of been the 6-man scorer off the bench, which usually that's not a post. But honestly, Tyler Linhart, when the offense breaks down, is kind of the best at creating his own shot this team has, whether it's face up in the high post or just backing down his guy in the low post. So Dallas, the answer is guys are a little more steady in their roles. And this team, I feel, knows a little bit more for a fact what it needs to be, which is this team needs to put up some points. They have to make threes. And look, I know if you're an old school basketball fan, there is some complaint about that. But that's honestly, to me, that's an ethical judgment of what basketball is supposed to be. This team should shoot threes. It has a lot of shooters, a lot of guys who can make shots. Tyler Russ this season averaging over 10 points a game. That's been a big find for this team. But that's just where you're at. Hey, if you're not going to score a ton on the post and you don't have guards who are going to create point shots off the dribble, what do? Well, you need to make 3-point shots that can open the post for you a little bit. That can open some dribble penetration for you. So in short, Dallas, I think the guys who returned, a lot of them have taken developmental steps. Like, hey, Chris Gonzalez is looking a lot stronger this season than last season. I mean, we're already hit on a few guys this year as well. And Colton Mitchell's been up and down. Colton Mitchell, it was big for Mitchell to score like he did against Portland State. Otherwise, that game's a blowout. but he's also trying to find, he's kind of finding his role too. Like there's no true quote unquote old school point guard on the roster. So guys figuring out exactly how to play the position. Also, like Colton Mitchell's young, man. Like it takes him a minute to, he gets a minute to figure out his role. Just like Tyler Linhart gets a minute to figure out his role. And Jack Payne played like he barely played for Colorado State. Jack Payne gets a minute to figure out how to produce. But all those guys, I think, are finding their roles. And that's how Idaho, look, Montana is probably going to finish number 2 or 3 in conference, and Idaho should have beat Montana in Moscow. So I guess that's kind of a long way of saying that's how I understand the team is everyone's kind of figuring out their role. And the teams, I feel like the teams figured it out a little bit better this season than they did last year.
Sounds like, again, just got to get a little bit hotter on the recruiting trail. But when you're picking up the pieces of a program that won 10 games in 3 years,
they just need to hit one home run next year, recruitment wise. If they can retain most of this roster and get a guy who can score off the dribble and just more depth in the post, this team's that's how this team takes that next step to competing for the top of the conference. But this team has a lot of good stuff going on. Alex Pribble, I think he's the right guy. I think it's just the rebuild is a little bit more old school here. Because, hey, to be fair, Pribble didn't purge the roster last season, and that's what a lot of teams when they're trying to rebuild do. No, like Pribble retained a bunch of the roster and just had a few guys he added via transfer. So I like what he's doing. Pribble clearly knows basketball. This team is just, again, one home run in recruitment away from taking a next step. And that's what to gauge in the future. But for this year, it's a fun basketball team. I enjoyed going to the game in Moscow. It was fun as hell. And I just like watching this team on ESPN Plus. They play hard. They clearly like each other. There's a lot of things moving in the right direction. You just have to just be patient with the Pribble rebuild. It's going to take a few years, whatever. This team is clearly doing better than any Vandal team in the last 6 years. So it's something different than what we've seen for 6 years. Not everything has to be winning the conference, guys. Like we can enjoy a developmental step this year. That's how I understand this Vandal basketball team.
The future is bright, but Brian, you mentioned in there specifically teams fighting towards the top of the conference, and Marten, 1 year removed from Carrie Amy onto Arthur Morera. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with pronunciation. Mora. Perfect. Marten, tell us about how the women's team has been doing this year.
Yeah, so far they as past like we say they went 1-1. They went 2-0. Sorry, Arthur. I did not mean to just give you guys credit. Had a pretty convincing win against Sacramento State. I'm already blanking on the score because the Big Sky Stats page hasn't been updated since January 6th. 63-48 against Sac State. It was convincing wire to wire. Then on Saturday had a pretty close game against Portland State, and as James can probably attest, it was not pretty. It was not a good game. They only led for a total of 5 minutes, but they didn't let up. And as Arthur, which I just found out, I didn't realize they had the post game interview with coaches at the end of the women at the end of the games on. If you watch the ESPN broadcast, which found out as Arthur was first to admit that it was not a good game. It was good. Kind of going into more stats for a second. Hope Hassman was another one. She, I think, only had 2 points in this game, but in this Portland State game, but they were the two clutchest points, getting a free throw to go up 5. But they have 2 players that are averaging nearly a double a game. Jennifer Adlin's averaging 9.7 points per game and 10.7 rebounds per game. And Rosie Schweitzer's averaging 10 points, 7 rebounds, but this team would blow last year's out of the water. They have nothing but
Olivia Nelson's putting up 11 points per game too. She's the one who kind of carried
Idaho.
She put up 19 against Portland State.
It's not going to show, maybe it will, but I don't buy gear all that often. But oh man, after what I saw with Olivia Nelson this year, like, you got to support this team. They are a lot of fun, as Tom Kendall, James, and everybody's saying, like, come to both games this weekend. They are a lot of fun.
Marten, what makes this team better than obviously the end of the Newly era. We all believed he'd turn things around eventually, and most likely he would have. But there were certainly a downslope at the end of Newly. Carrie Amy's first year was fine. What's so different about year one under Art?
I don't know how to describe it. It just seems like they have a spark to this team that they haven't I don't know how to describe it. They just have a spark to this team that it's kind of like that I haven't seen since the 2015, 2016 team that went to the tournament. They have depth. They have 9 players on this team that are played at least 14 of the 15 games. And they can have somebody have an off night and still win games. Like they had like Hope Hassman, like Brad's saying, chemistry is the best way to put it. They can have like their star player, Hope Hassman, who's their leading scorer, like have a cold night, only scoring 2 points and still pull games out. And it also helps that the coaching staff is amazing and does not choose to be like the Sac State coach and berate their players for almost everything.
Yeah, it certainly seems like the girls love playing for Art. We've heard great things about him, and obviously coming in is just getting promoted off the bench and taking this team to 11-4 already. Honestly, outstanding stuff. Really excited for the future of that program. But gentlemen, we've quickly covered basketball.
One thing to hit real quick, just with the women's team to keep it so you guys know where they're looking at standings wise. The Idaho women 11-4 on the season. They're tied for second place in the Big Sky right now at 3-1. Just Montana State women, they're 4-0. Yeah. But the thing
they lost to 3 to the number 1 team in the conference.
Yeah. The thing I'd add to is this women's team, like offensively, they're a lot more aggressive this year than last year. They're not draining the shot clock. They're not draining the shot clock for a good amount before becoming aggressive. They're a lot more aggressive off the dribble. The pacing's a lot better. Honestly, you're seeing it's not completely the same as the John Newly offense, but you can see there's some of that DNA in this women's team offensively, which is just part of why I think they're scoring better. They're looking a lot more aggressive, and they've got 4 women averaging above 9 points per game. So like there's depth too. There's not just a single player to key on. You have four women right now who are stepping up to lead this team offensively.
Gentlemen, we're going to cut this basketball talk a little short because breaking news in the last 15 minutes. And it's really not that breaking if you've been a part of patreon.com/Tubs at the Club. Again, guys, less than a cup of coffee a month. You knew this. For those of you listening that are Tubs Patreon guys, you knew this. Thomas Ford has just announced the last 2 members of the coaching staff. Tavita Finau is the defensive line coach, and former Los Angeles Ram Lance Dunbar coaching the running backs.
Did anyone talk about those 2 guys last week?
I feel like, Brian, I watched from the sidelines while I was nursing a sick cat. I feel like I remember hearing something about this last week.
Yeah, it's because you did. So, look, we'll do a deeper dive on Dunbar and Finau in a different episode. Full disclosure, we didn't prep for those guys, but our patrons have got to have a nice talk about them because if you're a patron, you knew about most coaching announcements well in advance. I'd say 9 of the announcements patrons had in advance. So, hey, Lance Dunbar is a pro, and anytime you can add a pro to the roster, there's some built-in respect there. And also, it's good as far as networking for those pro days. That's the thing that I think can effortlessly sell. This coaching staff as a whole, similar to Eck, it's a nice mix of youth and experience. And Dunbar, coming from the NFL, he's early in his coaching career, but he also was he wasn't like an all-star at the NFL, and I mean that in a good way. He's a guy who had to really learn the tricks of the trade to contribute and to stick to rosters. So I like that. I mean, especially if you look at basketball, but some of this in football too, the best coaches are typically not guys who are all pro. It's guys who really had to learn the game to stick with rosters. So, hey, I think Dunbar has a chance to do that. And I'm fine with pro. I love the idea of pros deciding, hey, if I come to Idaho, I can get my coaching career started. Finau has a different background. I mean, he wasn't a pro, but he played at University of Utah. He's coming from Utah State. So that expands that footprint of recruitment out into the Utah area. And look, I mean, I'll let you jump in with more on Finau as well. But it's look, we don't have like a demographic checklist of coaches that we're looking for, but it's always nice to have a guy with at least with a Polynesian background, because a lot of great linemen, both on the offense and defensive line, and also linebackers too in the Big Sky. They've come from that background, so it's nice to have that on the team.
Yeah, when Mike Iupati's probably the greatest single Vandal player in the history of the modern sport.
Recently, Giuliano Falanico.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's plenty of guys that have made their names in Idaho through that Polynesian pipeline. So really excited to have a guy. I really like the way that Ford has balanced this roster or the staff out. He was a D1 coach last year. Like, yes, the Utah State staff all got fired, and technically I think Eck was gone anyway, but yes, technically Bronco Mendenhall leaving for the Utah State job opened up the New Mexico job, which we're here, we've settled all those things. But having a guy that was an FBS D-line coach last year, like he's fallen down, but he's still a young guy. He's not been coaching all that long.
39 years old.
Yeah, he's again under 40. A couple of years ago was actually part of the Rams defensive line coaching with the Bill Walsh coaching fellowship that the NFL does to get minorities more opportunities to coach. So he's got some experience around the NFL. Again, his coaching path, maybe while he's taken this one step back, his trajectory is still forward, which is what you like to see. And then Brian, I could wax poetic for 30 more minutes about Lance Dunbar. For those who don't know, Lance Dunbar was one of the best running backs to ever hit the Sun Belt. He was at North Texas and was absolutely electric there. Had something like 4,500 yards and 50 touchdowns or something. Like it was insane. The guy had incredible college career. Goes undrafted, gets picked up by the Dallas Cowboys, which I do follow because, as people may be able to put together, my name is Dallas. I was named for the Dallas Cowboys. So Lance Dunbar is a really cool story because he's one of those guys, those undrafted running backs. They typically, especially the running back rooms in the NFL, yeah, you have some of the guys like Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry that are just otherworld running backs. But a lot of guys, they have shorter careers because there's not a whole lot that separates them athletically. There's so many guys that are just in that same group. So how do guys that are undrafted get on rosters when guys that are in 6th round picks sometimes don't last a year? It's by learning the pass protection and learning how to operate as part of the team. And that is what Lance Dunbar was all about. Unfortunately, his career was cut short from some leg injuries. He could not stay healthy in Dallas. He came to the Rams for one single season, Sean McVay's first year there, and got on the roster specifically because he was the guy that you knew what he was going to do in pass protection. He was not going to back down. He's going to keep as good of a chance as he can to block anybody that's coming at him. Love that. Yes, he might not have a ton of coaching history, but man, if you have a former undrafted guy in the NFL that is here to tell guys like Eli Cummings, hey man, you've got a shot. You just have to commit to doing everything, not just, hey, I got the ball and I want the ball. Like, you've got to be a 3-down running back because you got to be able to block on 3rd down if that protection changes. So super thrilled about that. But Brian, we're going to get into those guys later because that's not what we had prepared for today. Tom Kendall, shout out. Joe Namath was a Ram for a short time, so they can't be that bad. Thank you, Tom. Somebody out there doesn't hate the Rams. Brian, we are getting into a couple of the offensive coaches today because what we have talked about is there is a very good mix of guys with a lot of experience and guys with no experience on this staff. I'm going to pretend not to see that comment, whoever just posted that. Tubs of the Club. Brian's laughing, so Brian, piss off. I'm still mad at you for calling the St. Louis Rams last week. Anyways, guys, back on topic. Matt Linehan is our offensive coordinator. Matt Linehan does not have a very long coaching history, does not have a coaching tree, brand new to being an offensive coordinator. So what happens? He gets surrounded by a couple guys that have done it before. Tight ends coach and recruiting coordinator Sheldon Cross. He's been an offensive coordinator at all across the FCS. He multiple schools in the Big Sky. In fact, he's been a head coach in college. In high school. Our wide receivers coach, new newly announced wide receivers coach, Tyler Pow, not Tao Pai Pai. If anybody gets that joke, congrats on being as big of a nerd as I am. He was an offensive coordinator at an NAI school and a D2 school. So we've packaged Linehan with some guys that are certainly well versed in what it takes to run an offense. Brian, one final shout out, Tom Kendall calling out Eric Yarber, Vandal legend, coaches receivers for the Rams. Obviously does an incredible job there. The Yarbinators are what they call themselves. Puka Nakua, Cooper Cup, phenomenal group. Brian, I will stop talking about the Rams. Take us home, Vandal football.
Okay, I'm going to start talking about Tyler Pow because we hit the Linehan background last week, and look, there's just not a ton to talk about. We know, like Thomas Ford has said, like the offense is going to be relatively similar to what Luke Schleissner called, but probably a little bit different pass game because of Linehan's background there. Okay, the end. So if you're going to have an inexperienced offensive coordinator, it's great. You want to surround him with some guys who are experienced, and also some guys who, hey, maybe they're hoping they can become a coordinator elsewhere, and that this is a good launching pad onto their next job. So Tyler Pow is an example of a guy, like you said, he was an offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach the last 2 years at Augustana University, D2 school. So worth bringing up there. In 2023, Casey Bauman, former Montana State quarterback, was like the top passer in their division, playing under Pow. And last season, I believe their quarterback was like the number 2 passer in the league. So Augustana didn't win their conference, but hey, Tyler Pow certainly he ran an offense, especially passing offense, that had no problem moving the ball. And he's previously been a wide receiver coach and tight end coach at South Dakota. That's where Idaho got Rob Orich from as well. So the Missouri Valley Football Conference, especially the Dakotas, have been a pretty rich source of coaches to get either as head coaches or coordinators for schools out west. I mean, hey, look at what Idaho did with that. Look what Montana State's done as well. So I guess I like that we have a guy who not only has he got coordinator experience at multiple levels, but he's also if you're not going to be from the Big Sky, I want you to come in from the Missouri Valley Football Conference if your background's FCS. As at least I want some guys like that. The Missouri Valley Football Conference has been, they've been just like the Big Sky, but like a half step ahead because they're winning the championships these last handful of years. So being able to compete with teams that are doing that, being able to have experience looking at what those programs seem to be. And hey, South Dakota was the 4 seed. I know when Orich came over, South Dakota felt like they were kind of ascendant and up and down a little bit, but there's some good coaches who come out of South Dakota. Hell, Caleb Heim, strength coach, came to Idaho from South Dakota. So a lot of people think South Dakota is a good place to look at. And I'm just going to say, I'm happy that talking Pow right here, feeling like we have a guy overqualified as a wide receivers coach, but who's still like relatively early in his career. He's not like in his first couple years, but he's still young-ish as far as a coach. I like that. I expect he's going to be hungry to use this to move up. But if Idaho's going to have, Thomas Ford is not inexperienced as a play caller because he's been a head coach multiple times, but at the D1 level, Thomas Ford has not been a play caller. Matt Linehan at the D1 level has not been a play caller. Now we do know Court Dennison has at the D1 level been a play caller, but that's a decent amount of inexperience at the very top. So I just like the idea of picking some guys who have some background to not only run their positions well, but also that's just that's going to be a resource for guys like Thomas Ford and Matt Linehan. So no, I love that addition.
Yeah, I'm thrilled about this hire, Brian. Honestly, we're at a spot where we should be thrilled about every hire because this is the time where, there's a new coaching staff coming in after Idaho has been good. So it's not just hopefully these guys figure out a way to turn it around. It's like, no, we should be excited. Like Vandal football has a pretty good base here. But you mentioned the different statistical things about Augustana's offense, but Casey Bauman got a cup of coffee in the NFL. He was on the Chargers practice squad in the offseason. And then didn't unfortunately make it through the 53 and didn't make it onto a practice squad. They also had an offensive lineman, Blake Larson, that made it onto the Rams. Was an undrafted free agent. Again, did not make it into the season roster. But D2, how many guys are getting offers like that? I mean, Hayden Hatton is going to go down as one of the greatest Vandals of all time, and he got a shot with the Seahawks and then hasn't really done anything, and maybe that was his one shot. Well, these two guys from D2 that were coached by Pow were able to get this same thing. And yes, Bauman came from Montana, but it's the type of thing that you want to see when you're getting coaches at this level. You want something to be able to hang your hat on and say, like, there's something about this guy, or this guy has done something for guys at this level that they're going to buy in. And how do you get guys to buy in? Well, you say, hey, he was the receivers coach, well, the tight ends coach, and then the receiver coach at South Dakota when they had their turnaround. I mean, South Dakota was terrible. And then 2018 made the playoffs for the second time in school history. And then, they've been significantly better over the last 5-6 years. It's not been quite the disgusting football that they were putting together out there. But he does that, and then he takes off for a promotion and does a pretty good job at Augustana and does lead a pretty good passing attack there. As a receivers coach, getting back into the FCS, absolutely love this hire. Absolutely love getting a guy that does have some play calling experience, because again, Matt Linehan does not. So what you're looking for the guys that are going to be quote unquote under Matt Linehan, because he's the offensive coordinator, you want to have some guys that have some in-game coaching experience with, hey, what the hell are we going to do? 3rd and 2, we have to get this first down. What are we going to do? It's nice to have some other guys that have some, I've been there before. Is it the same as an FCS playoff game? Maybe not, but it's something. It's more than what I have, which is saying, hey, in Madden, this is the play I would call. Like, as Patty says, very good D2 program, Augustana. So absolutely thrilled about this hire, Brian.
Also, he gives the staff, a lot of the staff is kind of, not completely, but the footprint, the natural recruitment footprint would be the Pacific Northwest. And Pow adds a guy who's been in the Midwest area for a while, which just further pushes out geographically where some Idaho coaches are going to have some connective tissue with recruits today.
And he also played in the CFL. Is the one other thing I want to point out. Like, hey, let's be real. Most of these Vandals are not going to sniff the NFL. That's just how it is. That's how it was when Idaho was in the FBS. It's certainly how it's going to be here in the FCS. Idaho just doesn't. Thank you, Brian. He did not leave early for the CFL draft, as far as I am aware. But that could be an accident. Even to Occidental. Anyways, sorry, stupid jokes. That's the kind of thing you look for a lot of these guys that want to. A lot of these guys don't want their college careers to end here at Idaho. For most of them, it will. For those guys that have that small glimmer of hope to be one of the infinitesimally small percentage of college players that go on to play pro elsewhere, being surrounded by coaches that have been there and done that, even if it was 22 years ago that he was playing in the Canadian Football League, that's still, he got drafted and played in the CFL. That is something tangible to these guys to automatically say, hey, you should be listening to this guy. He does have an idea of what it takes. Same with Lance Dunbar. The same thing I was saying. Like, when the guys have proven they've been there and have been able to do the same thing that most of these kids dream of, man, it's hard to not buy in on that.
And then, so Sheldon Cross, we do need to talk about Cross for a second, the tight ends recruiting coordinator. He's different background, but he's been an OC at 4 different college stops dating back to 2005. Start in 05-06, he was at Iowa Wesleyan NAIA school. In 2015, he was the OC at Idaho State. In 2023, he was the OC at Cal Poly when, hey, I know Cal Poly was bad in 2023, but offensively, they can move the ball. That was the number 2 passing team in the Big Sky in 2023. And then last season, he's the OC at Stetson, which is FCS Pioneer League. And Stetson led the league in passing yards and yards per game last season. That was with 6 different starting quarterbacks over the course of 11 games. So Cross, look, he has some background as a play caller. He's also was a very good high school coach, which is part of where I think he's going to add value as a recruiter in the Pacific Northwest, especially Western Washington, where we've had a lot of good Vandals. And we know that the Ford connection goes there anyway, but I'm all in on doubling down on strength. And there's a lot to like about Cross's background. Again, I like overqualified position coaches, especially with the youth we have at the top of at the top of this, for lack of a better term, ticket. I want guys who in a supporting role can, in practice, like Dallas, like you said, can talk about what, how it worked for them, what to do differently with that mix of, youth and experience with kind of like the hunger of youth at the actual like coordinator head coaching positions. There's kind of an interesting cultural dynamic. I think that this team could get that might feel a little bit different from Eck. And a ball game was on here. Thomas Ford is just a more intense guy than Jason Eck was. So I feel like the youth at the top of, at the coordinator positions plus Ford is just going to mean this team at the coaching level might be a little bit more intense. And I really like that intensity to be backed up with experience at the position coaches.
Yeah. Brian, I've known who Sheldon Cross was for quite a while because as somebody who used to be a journalist, I remember when Idaho State had this nice little turnaround where all of a sudden they won 8 games. It was like, what the hell happened to that program? Sheldon Cross came in and ran the air raid there. That's what happened. And then we've talked about Sam Heward before, or we've talked about him many times before, and probably we'll end up talking about him at least once more. But he did coach Sam Heward. Yes, the name has certainly come before the actual production on the field, but the guy won a whole bunch of titles as the coach at Kennedy Catholic. They were an absolute wagon. Sam Heward was great in high school, and then again he just jumps right back into being an offensive coordinator and has crushed it the last 2 years at 2 schools that I would not say are historically football powers. Cal Poly, obviously not great, and then the Stetson Hatters are in the Pioneer League, so it's not like he's going off and having these incredible numbers at these places that are known for football. Like he went and he succeeded at Idaho State. I mean, yeah, it didn't go great at the end there because it's Idaho State. Nothing ever ends well for them, but you go back and you look at, man, this guy has been everywhere. This is the exact kind of guy that I want involved with Matt Linehan. This is a guy he can learn from. He's been a play caller, like you said, Brian, 4 different places. He's been a play caller in the last decade. 3 of them are FCS school. 2 of them are Idaho opponents. All in all to say, I am absolutely thrilled that there's a guy with some serious air raid credentials on this offense, because what we're expecting is, it's going to be very similar to the Eck offense, but I think maybe we're going to see a little bit less of the cute shit. We've certainly talked about the pros and the positives of the Eck era, but one of the negatives was, Luke Schleisner was not the most how do you say it? Not the most eloquent guy. We interviewed him the one time. He was pretty reserved. Doesn't seem to have a ton of that go-getter, outgoing personality. That was because, from what we could tell, is he was the football genius. Eck was the face. He was the guy running things in the background. Sometimes got a little too cute for his shit. What's the one thing air raid guys usually don't do? They don't usually get too cute with it. If anything, they commit to their own shit too much and are too afraid to break out and do things a little bit differently. So it's going to be really nice to see, Brian, that Matt Linehan has somebody that, and the air raids, it's not simple. I mean, simple in the terms of it's, hey, there's 4 things that you're going to do. Look at that guy, that guy, that guy, that guy. If none of them are open, throw it away. Yes, that was a slight dig at Leach. I loved Mike Leach. Mike Leach never quite committed enough to hey, yes, the air raid's a genius thing, and scoring 50 points a game is awesome. But when you're up by 20 points, it's time to start running the fucking football and don't throw them back into the game. Anyways, all of this big long ramble to say, Brian, Matt Linehan has a guy that Sheldon Cross, it wouldn't have shocked me if Sheldon Cross had been named the offensive coordinator outright. If Matt Linehan was not here, or Matt Linehan went to New Mexico with Eck, it wouldn't have shocked me if Sheldon Cross was named the offensive coordinator here. So to be taking the position as tight ends coach, and then also the recruiting coordinator, so he's he is doing more than just the tight ends coach. Absolutely thrilled, Brian, that this is becoming maybe a more talented coaching staff than what Eck had in his final season here.
Yeah, and one other point too with Cross, and hey, this also goes with Papow too, is when we talk about what transfers are coming in, like, hey, spoiler alert, right now the quarterback room, just like last season, is very young. And until an upperclassman is recruited to compete for that starting spot, whoever is the starting quarterback is going to not have a ton of experience starting. I feel like last season, it really took Schleissner a long time to figure out what he wanted to do with Jack Wagner. And I just like the idea of a couple more guys with OC background who, if a guy like Wagner, and I'm saying a guy like Wagner, of all of the young guys, if it's a younger guy who comes in and starts, they're going to have some areas where they're eventually, you'd hope they improve. For Wagner, dude couldn't throw to 60% to the field, which is like, hey, the middle portion. So you want to have the offense catered a little bit more around what he can do. And I felt like it took a long time for Idaho to figure out how to do that with Jack Wagner. With Matt Linehan, who was on the roster last year, plus a couple other OC guys and a guy like Sheldon Cross with a different offensive background. To me, the hope then is that if our quarterback's a younger guy who we need to adapt the game plan around, we've got a lot of guys with different backgrounds who can make it happen.
Couldn't have said it better, Brian. That's the big thing for me is there is a lot more experience on this staff than the X staffs were. And that not that that's necessarily a bad thing that the X staff maybe wasn't quite as seasoned as this one is. But you know, when our concern here is Thomas Ford has never been a head coach at this level, never called plays at this level, and you fill out the staff with a bunch of guys that are either former pros or have a bunch of experience coaching and calling plays at this level or levels near it. We've got a long ways until August and September, but it does certainly feel like, hey, we're not going to shove Jack Wagner into this same offense that is all predicated about making the quick read, the easy read, and just throwing to the open guy. Well, that wasn't really Wagner's strength. It was let's chuck the ball down the field as far as we can and let him use his legs a little bit. Maybe we're going to see coaches adopt a little bit different things. Like, again, the air raid is a great example. You could have a guy like Luke Falk stand there in the pocket, not moving a whole lot, and then move when he absolutely needed to and set incredible records. And then you have Connor Halliday, Spokane native, who was essentially a statue and I think still might hold the single game record for passing yards because Leach at least adopted a little bit of changes. And again, Mike Leach, one of the greatest coaches of all time, but with this amount of experience and this amount of guys that have been successful in so many different places, it does feel like, hey, if Jack Wagner's the guy and he is struggling with those intermediate over the middle throws, let's design an offense that he can succeed in instead of let's shove him into this offense and then bench him when it doesn't work. And then that guy gets hurt. And right now Wagner's back and oh man, we got to hope Lane's back. Don't get me wrong. I loved that offense, but I would love to see a little bit more adjustment from the coaching staff with the players that they have. And it to me, Brian, it feels like this is certainly what's going on. Patty Frakes in the comment section. Well, to do that, OL does need to take a step. That is absolutely true. And Brian, I think that's a very good segue into our next section. But first, if you are looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been vandal-owned and operated since 1976, and they're ready to take you on the vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River of no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. You can even check out special trips like one to see the Perseid meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and guys, the same thing I say every week, fish the most remote stretches of river in the entire country. If you like to fish, this is the place to do it. Just bring your clothes, and HRE is going to handle the rest. Grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 406-540-4450 or check them out at hughesriver.com. So, Brian, Patty brings up a really good point. Tom Kendall jumping in as well, saying offensive line is my biggest worry on offense. This is where things get interesting, Brian, because Idaho, once again, absolutely devastated by the transfer portal. We've got a list of most of the guys that are gone. I'm just going to quickly read through them so that anybody listening to this in the future can at least rewind a little bit and just like, here's the whole list of them. Jack Lane, quarterback to New Mexico. Keyshawn James Newby, defensive end. Opted for the NFL draft, then chose to go to New Mexico, assuming he didn't get a great draft grade. Linebacker Jack Stanek to New Mexico. Wide receiver Jordan Dwyer to TCU. Wide receiver Mark Hamper to Wisconsin. Defensive lineman Dallas Afalava to Wake Forest. Defensive end Malachi Williams to that school in Boise. Defensive back Andrew Marshall to Nebraska. Running back Day Buchanan to New Mexico. Defensive back Dwayne McDougal to San Diego State. Offensive lineman Jack Foster to Nevada. Defensive lineman Amari Notice to Coastal Carolina. Defensive lineman Xavier Slayton to New Mexico. Defensive back Abe Williams to New Mexico. Offensive lineman Caden Robnett to New Mexico. Defensive back Diesel Wilkinson to Montana. Tight end Mason Minnie to Cal. Good for him on that one. So outside of Mason Minnie, who didn't play a ton, again, he's the third tight end for most of the year. I mean, he got snaps, but he was certainly not an integral part of the offense. Diesel Wilkinson got some snaps, not a ton of playing time. Caden Robnett was a starter, got hurt very quickly. Abe Williams got hurt very quickly. Every other one of those names we listed, guys, are guys that had some serious playing time. So, Brian, after I just data dumped for the people, where do you want to take our transfer talk first?
I mean, first, we hit most of the guys who were confirmed as coming back from the 2 deep who entered the portal, but one offensive line, we have Nathan Knapik, Nate Azaparty, and Leighton Vining all entered the portal, came back to Idaho. Running back Eli Cummings, same thing. Wide receiver Emerson Cortez Menjivar, he's the top returning pass catcher. He entered the portal, came back, and then linebacker Isaiah King, he's coming back as well. I bring that up because it's kind of hard to explain the 2 deep with what is returning without saying, hey, essentially a gigantic between transfers and graduation, a huge percentage of the defense has to be replaced. Like on our D line, the 2 deep, there's 2 returners out of those 8 positions. The 2 returners being Sam Brown and Zach Krotzer, who, hey, glad to have both those guys back. We need Brown's experience on the edge. We need Krotzer had some big plays as a tackle this season, right? So good to have those guys back. But that's a lot of snaps to replace on the D line. Linebackers, it's pretty. If you look at the 2 deep, I mean, it's pretty much. 2 deep from last game, we got like 2 guys coming back. Already brought up Isaiah King and then Dylan Lane, who was a depth piece towards the end of the season, but he's coming back. But otherwise, those 3 listed starting running backs, linebacker spots from last season. So that's 6 total positions, 2 guys coming back. And then, man, just the secondary, virtually everyone who was a contributor is gone. So a lot of people to replace on the defensive side of the ball.
I also missed Zach Johnson in their linebacker headed to Stanford. So when you throw in all of these names, Brian, you can just pull up the defensive statistics from this year, and if you sort it by tackles, number 1 tackler to New Mexico, number 2 graduated, number 3 Stanford, number 4 New Mexico, number 5 San Diego State, number 6 Nebraska, number 7 the 7th leading tackler for the Vandals last year is the first guy returning in that stat breakout. So then you have Matthias Bertram, who graduated. Zach Krotzer is back. And then you just go down that list and it's more guys that are just gone. So this is going to be a completely different looking defense, Brian, which is, again, why we've talked about Cord Dennison and being quite thrilled to have a guy that was a P5 defensive coordinator to help move some of this around. James Aldrich in the comment section, Sam Brown is the way down in the valley chant leader, so it's good to keep him around. Yeah, I think Sam Brown, Zach Krotzer, Matthias McLean, I think those guys are probably going to be huge next year because I do think that's the one thing the program did really well. They brought in a bunch of talent, and it certainly looked different than the Petrino era, where when a guy went down, the next guy up was typically pretty solid. We saw that with the offensive line this year. Did they take a step forward to being the Montana State-like offensive line? No. But what happened when Caden Robnett, the words are hard. What happened when Caden Robnett went down? The offensive line continued. What happened when Charlie Vleem went down? The offensive line continued. Like the depth that was built here, I don't think that's all gone. It's terrifying to lose everything, but don't forget, guys.
On the O-line, virtually none of the depth is gone. We lost the left tackle, Aiden Knapik. We lost the right tackle, Jack Foster. And then, as you referenced, Kane Robnett, who, as far as we're concerned, talking last season, barely played.
Yeah. I just mean that from there's 3 starters from game 1 that are gone. That was what I meant by that. So the depth should still be there, but the belief is that depth, guys, is still the same as it was last year. Of these guys are going to be able to take steps in and not fall off completely, like what we saw with, honestly, the first 2 years of X regime, where the Petrino lines were not built well enough. It sucks. I hate to say that because it sounds like I'm talking down on those guys, but it was pretty apparent those lines could not hold up. And now that we're starting to see that, hopefully we'll see a couple more transfers in, and we'll talk about that on another show, Brian. But for me,
a different way of saying it real quick on the O-line is, so I'm going to more pay attention to Montana State as the reference point. The 2 deep listed on the O-line, that's 10 guys, 2 of them are gone, none graduated. So there's a lot of depth that's coming back, a lot of guys who got some experience. So obviously we're going to expect that Ford's going to hit some guys in the portal potentially, as well as high school guys, and we've seen high school guys contribute and redshirt freshmen contribute on the O-line. But offensive, to me, like that's, Patty hit on this earlier, the O-line needing to take a big step forward, each year, which has been happening.
Mm-hmm.
The O-line was not hit the way other position groups were.
Yeah, again, if you take out Robnett because he did not play much of the year, 2 starters down, but both of your tackles, that does suck. But of all the things, Patty Frakes in the comment section, Charlie Vleem is back, right? We believe so. Have not seen anything otherwise. So there's another starter that is going to be coming back after missing most of last year. So this is a team that has a lot of offensive line talent, and it's a team that still brings back one hell of a running back room. Yes, Day Buchanan exploded at the end of the year and averaged something like 7 yards a carry. And looked really good when he was healthy. It's a bummer that he's gone, but man, Nate Thomas was a bowling ball. Nate Thomas was so much fun to watch. He's going to be back. Eli Cummings is going to be back as well for his final season. Art Williams, I thought, looked really good in the time he got. So there's 3 guys right there that are key contributors from last year, or maybe not key contributors, but guys that put in significant numbers last year that are all coming back. This should be a team that's going to be able to run the football. Do we know what the passing offense is going to look like? No. We have no idea who the quarterback is going to be. If it's going to be one of the guys that's in the room right now between Josephek, Bay, Koch, and Wagner, it could be one of those guys. Who's going to be catching the ball other than Cortez Menovar? Trace Higgins looked pretty good. Tony Harsty got some time. Like, there are guys that had some time. I'm not yet at the point of throwing up oh man, Idaho lost a bunch. What are we going to do? Yeah, is this team probably not going to be a semifinalist? Probably not. I don't know if they would have been a semifinalist if Eck was still here. However, man, playoff football should certainly be the target for Idaho. And Thomas Ford has certainly made it clear that the expectation is this is a program that's going to start fighting for Big Sky championships, and that's the direction things need to be.
So I just think it's 2 different discussions about next season. And one, we can't extrapolate too much. There's not a complete roster. No team has a complete roster. Montana State just lost the national championships. They're getting to live through the shit Idaho lived through of seeing guys leave. And that helped Idaho. We'll talk about that in a different episode. On the defensive side, there's a lot of snaps to be replaced. And we're just going to see what that means. On the offensive side of the ball, it's very easy to freak out when you lose a couple of receivers, like when Idaho lost Hayden Hatton and Jermaine Jackson in graduation, and this season losing Jordan Dwyer and Mark Hamper. It's usually not that big a deal to replace most of the production of your wide receiver room. Usually losing like a running back isn't not that big a deal. And Idaho has most of their guys coming back. And hey, Art Williams is another guy who contributed, especially later in the season, in the running back room. Idaho's running backs, essentially any of them taking a step to a half step up next season completely replaces all the lost running back production. The big deal is that at the FCS level, you cannot just transfer portal your way to a great O-line. And the fact that that's the single position group that was, to me, hit the least, and referencing my point of the end of the season, that's a big deal for Idaho. That's kind of the foundation that Idaho needs for guys like, hey, we talked for a minute about quarterback. If Idaho can take another half step up with their O-line production, then honestly, like who the quarterback is a little bit less of a deal. It won't be like when Idaho needed McCoy those first 2 years because he can move. And then last year, Idaho, when against the better teams, they did need a guy like Lane who could make decisions fast and read the field. This next season, if the O-line production takes another half step forward, which the O-line was way better in pass protection in 2024 than in the previous years, there's going to be a lot of different types of quarterback who can be successful in Idaho.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, that comes down to football at pretty much every level, from the NFL down to the first days of flag football. If you can run the ball, your offense is going to be pretty effective for the most part. If you can figure out a way to run the ball, you're going to be able to make good things happen. And Idaho has absolutely brought back, we haven't even touched the tight ends. Idaho has brought back most of the tight end room. Yeah, it's very strange that Mason Mini, good for him. He committed to Michigan State and then backed out of that and ended up at Cal. Great for him getting 2 different P4 offers. Did not expect the third tight end at Idaho to do that. Just great for him. That room still has a whole bunch of bodies in it. And so if we see that continue to develop, and again, it takes tight end the longest to develop. So if some of those guys, I know Chance Bogan was a big name a couple years ago. Chance Bogan is entering that time of like, if you're going to be the guy, this is typically when the guy starts to show up. So Brian, defensively, yes, things are going to be interesting, but we've talked about it a little bit. I thought the defense did look really good last year for what they were doing. It worked really well, but I think it's pretty safe to say there was a step back from Rob Orich to Dan Jackson. So I'm not going to sit here and say losing all of these guys, Idaho's defense is screwed. And maybe they get back to playing a little bit more aggressive. Maybe it's like Rob Orich's first year. They came in and just all of a sudden it's turnovers everywhere because guys are flying around the field. Maybe that's what happens. That's
essentially what Thomas Ford, head coach, had described in some of his media appearances. Is still running quarters, but also having more aggressive blitz packages on third down.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, because how many times did we see Idaho get somebody into a 3rd and 8 and they would pick up 13 yards? It was like, really need to get off the field there. You're not going to get off the field all the time, but converting like 20% is what it felt like at points. It just was not going great. But Brian, we are over an hour already into this episode. Any final thoughts on the transfer portal and the state of Idaho's roster today?
No. I mean, other than to say we chose to not cover it today, Ford has received quite a few commitments to Idaho. So the roster's taken shape. Hey, in 2022, Jason Eck took until March to get his final coach added. Ford and Eck were hired on the exact same day, December 18th, just 3 years apart. Ford has, as of January 14th, we got the entire coaching roster. Eck's offensive coordinator, Luke Schleissner. Now, he was there working already, but he wasn't officially announced until January 5th. Ford is way ahead of schedule with getting guys officially in place and moving. So a lot of things going right now in the offseason as far as they can. So, hey, just buckle up, enjoy it. And like, hey, you said it earlier, Dallas, we said it before. The offseason, your job as a fan is, hey, it's fun to learn who the people are. So pay attention. But other than that, there's nothing you can do except be supportive and be excited about the season to come. So that is your role right now, essentially. So, hey, sit back, enjoy. And in future weeks, you're going to learn more about who the rest of the coaching staff is. That's kind of the template we're going to work through here. And in future episodes, you're going to learn more about the recruits. The good news is since Ford's moved so goddamn fast, we can make this more of a steady movement throughout basketball season to keep everyone caught up on what's going on football wise. But to say my last thing, like Jason Mayer says in the comment section, get to Moscow for the basketball doubleheader versus Eastern Washington this Saturday. Yeah, get in there. Both the basketball teams are worth supporting, guys. I understand. Not shocking that when the men's team's terrible for 6 years, it takes a minute to figure that stuff out. But we need to get more people into ICCU, man. We have a good women's team. We have an improving men's team. What's going on there is 100% worth supporting. If you can get there this Saturday, please do.
With that said, guys, go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
Go Vandals.
Go Vandals.